All right, so now that we've ported our Express middleware over so that it's usable by Socket.io, the next thing that we're going to do is see how to actually add that middleware effectively to both the initial socket connection and to subsequent events that occur on that socket connection. So what this is going to look like, we're going to open up the socket connection that we defined, first of all, note detail connection. And just like we added the load auth user from token middleware to this middleware array for our note detail connections configuration object, we're going to do that same thing with a few other pieces of middleware, and additionally, we're also going to add those things to our socket event handlers that we've created. Now, this is just going to include one right now, which is going to be the update note handler, and basically what we're going to do is just add the middleware in here. Now, making this all work is actually going to involve some changes in the server.js file as well. So anyway, just keep in mind that we'll be making some changes in there as well. Awesome. So first of all, let's start off with our note detail connection, I suppose. Let's think about a user who's trying to connect to this note detail connection, right? They're on the note detail page, which means that in addition to being logged in and having a valid ID token, which is what this middleware is checking, they're also going to need to have their email verified. So what we're going to do for that, we're going to just say email, or user email is verified, that is. And that's going to be the middleware, and for some reason that didn't get imported automatically for me, so let's say user email is verified middleware, and then we're going to say from // sockets middleware / user email is verified middleware. So cool, that should protect our note detail connection here from users whose email is not verified. So the next thing that we're going to do is go into our individual update note handler. Right, so what we're going to want to do here is add middleware to this update note handler that will make sure that if a user doesn't fit this criteria in the middleware, then they're not allowed to do whatever it is they're trying to do, right? In this case, we only want users to be able to send this update note event if they are allowed to edit the note, right? So what we're going to do here is add the user can edit note middleware to this. And we're going to have to import that as well. Import user can edit note middleware from // socket connections, or socket middleware, that is, / user can edit note middleware. All right. So again, the difference between the middleware that we're defining inside the individual handlers and inside the connection is that the connection middleware will affect whether or not the user is able to initialize that connection in the first place, right? Whereas the middleware for our individual handlers is going to determine whether or not a user is allowed to emit this specific event here, right? So if a user can't edit the note, we obviously don't want our server to respond to an update note event coming from that user, right? So that's the basic idea here, and that about completes adding middleware to our note detail connection and handler. So let's head over to the server now and make a few important changes that we'll need. Okay, so we already saw how to loop through the middleware for an individual connection and make sure that all of those middleware functions pass before allowing the user to connect. However, what we're also going to need to do is for each individual event handler specification, we're going to need to take all of the middleware from that and do pretty much the same thing. So what that's going to look like here, first of all, let's take a look at this onConnect function that we had for our note detail connection. That's going to be handle note detail connection. Remember that this was returning either true or false depending on whether or not everything went well. Now, we're currently not really doing anything about that, so what we're going to do here is say const is success equals await blah blah blah. And if this thing wasn't successful, right, if we weren't successful in initializing this connection, right, and handling whatever new connection it is, we're not going to want to add any of these other event handlers, right? So what this is going to look like, we're going to say if is success, then and only then will we do all of this stuff and add all of our event handlers to our socket. So inside here now, the next thing that we're going to want to do is when we loop through each of these event handlers, we're going to want to make sure that the middleware for each of those event handlers checks out. And what that's going to look like is we're going to, inside this for each function, say for let middleware function of, and then we're going to do something very similar to what we did up here with our connection. We're just going to say event handler dot middleware, or empty array, right? Just providing a backup value in case we didn't specify middleware on an event handler. And what we're going to do is loop through the middleware functions and check out to make sure that all of them return true. If anything returns false, we're not actually going to add that event listener to this socket. So what we're going to do is say const is success, and yeah, we're just defining the same thing with the same name up here. Why not? So that's going to be equals await middleware function, and we're going to pass the socket as an argument, right? Remember that that's a prerequisite for all of our middleware functions that we've defined for socket IO. And once we've gotten the verdict, right, whether or not we should continue, we're going to say if is not success, right? So if not is success, that is, we're just going to return, and that will prevent the event listener from actually getting added to the socket, which is exactly what we would want in that case. Okay, so just to clarify what this would look like as an example, if we open up our update note handler, for example, this one has the middleware user can edit note middleware. What that means is that when we're looping through all of our connections event handlers, we're going to get to our update note handler, and we're going to loop through all of its middleware to see if that checks out. And what we're going to see is if a user doesn't have edit access to the given note, right? If the middleware function that we specified up here returns false, then we're just going to return, and that event isn't going to be added to this socket. So the client side could try all it wants to emit update note events, but our server won't be listening to it. Okay? So that's the idea there. So let's just check and make sure that this works. Oops, so it looks like we have some kind of error in our code. And it looks like we're using await inside for each. So what we're going to need to do actually is change this to a for loop. There are other ways of doing this too, by the way, but this is the easiest way. What we're going to do is just say for let event handler of, this would be connection dot event handlers. And we refresh. And we could provide a backup value for that. Let's just do that while we're at it, in case we didn't specify any event handlers for a given connection. Okay, and this is just going to be a for loop now, so everything else should work inside of there, and await should work inside of there as well. Cool, so now that we've done that, let's check and see if that fixed the problems we were having. And it looks like we have a new client just connected, server's listening on port 8080, so it looks like everything is working. Let's just go back and check and make sure. We'll just do a quick spot check to make sure we didn't break anything. So we'll say edit, and if we edit one of these, we're going to see that that shows up just like before. So everything seems to be working after adding our middleware still. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.